I was very confident that COVID and eventually long COVID were treatable because I have a lot of experience treating Lyme disease. I've been treating hundreds of people with Lyme disease going back for more than a decade. I started treating people who are now diagnosed with long COVID going back to June of 2020. So just a couple of months after COVID hit. I was confident that long COVID was treatable because the disease progression and the etiology is similar. It's not the same as, but it's similar to Lyme disease.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I've heard it put forth that there's not one true Chinese medicine, that it's a weedy and tangled plurality of perspectives and methods, lineages and innovations, government-approved guidelines, and rebellious dissent. There is no one unified East Asian medicine when you think about it. Just like, really, there's no one unified Western medicine either. We often speak of Western medicine as one monolithic structure, but when you look closer, you'll see, much the same as East Asian medicine, there are competing ideas. I suspect it is the marketplace of differing ideas that in fact drives innovation and progress. Just because a method is old, that does not make it irrelevant in our modern time, nor for that matter does its age prove its curative power. Just like hammers aren't better than screwdrivers, they're different tools that solve different problems, so too with medicine. Unless you're a specialist, you'll need multiple tools in the kit to be an effective practitioner. Beyond that, you're going to need to know which tool is the right tool for any particular job and how to apply it. We often talk about the practice of East Asian medicine in terms of working as a gardener tending an ecosystem. It's a good metaphor because the skillful gardener understands how things develop and change over time. That what is needed at one point would be useless or even detrimental at another. I often hear the voice of Chip Chase reminding me that all solutions are temporary. You can't really depend on protocols if you want to learn from your clinical experience. You could say that there's a lot of trial and error that goes into practicing East Asian medicine. It's easy to get caught up with thinking about the error part as making mistakes, but really, it's a process of learning to use your discernment and develop the capacity to understand throughout the process of treatment what is helpful and what is not. In this conversation with Brendan Kelly, we discuss the need for different perspectives on treatment and, for that matter, the use of different traditions at various phases of treating chronic health problems, especially post-viral infections like long COVID. It rather harkens back to that admonition from my 8th grade shop teacher, right tool for the right job, which sounds easy, but in practice, it can be challenging. There are some clinically useful ideas in this conversation about applying different perspectives at different phases of the treatment process. You'll find out all about it right after this. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Geological is delighted to have sponsors who bring you terrific services, products, and classes. Dong acupuncture is not difficult once you understand some of the fundamental principles. Sean Goodman has a learning platform to help you with that. Integrating Western lab results with East Asian medicine, it's not just possible, it's revealing. Jessica Parker can teach you some helpful skills. Later in the show, find out how Jane's AI Scribe can help bring more presence to your practice, and Blue Poppy reminds you of a surprisingly important resource in your clinic. Whether you already practice Master Dong's acupuncture or are interested in discovering this powerful system, I'd like to introduce you to Tip of the Needle, Sean Goodman's complete learning platform for practitioners and students. At the heart of the platform is the Dong Points app, which gives you quick access to point locations, clinical applications, needling demonstrations, and essential information for your treatments and studies. Tip of the Needle also includes a growing collection of foundational advanced CEU online courses focused on Master Dong's acupuncture. Whether you are looking for a clinical reference, structured education, or a way to deepen your skills, Tip of the Needle brings everything together in one place. Visit www.dongsacupuncture.org, that's TUNGS acupuncture.org, to explore the courses and resources, and download the Dong Points app today for 14 days of free premium access.
Here's something no one tells you in acupuncture school. You're already a functional medicine practitioner. You read the root cause, treat the body as a whole, catch imbalance years before it becomes diseased. But today's patients live in a world of data. So when you say kidney yang deficiency and their MD says that their TSH is normal, they believe the lab over you. Here's the problem. Normal isn't the same as optimal, and normal doesn't help a patient who's still exhausted, still searching for an answer. I'm Dr. Jessica Parker. For years, I watched patients get dismissed by conventional lab ranges that missed what was actually happening to their bodies. So I learned to read Western labs through an East Asian medicine lens. Now, when I feel it in the pulse, I can show it in the data. That's not alternative medicine. That's real healthcare. My fall cohort teaches you to do the same. Spot the imbalance inside a normal result and show your patients the proof. Enrollment is open now and seats fill fast, so head to drjessicaparker.com to save your spot.
Brendan Kelly, welcome to Geological.
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. You wrote to me, there's a couple things that you've been looking at. One is climate change, you've explored it in a book, and the other is something that many of us face in our clinic with our patients, which is long COVID. Here we are in 2026. We're 6 years away from when things first dramatically changed our world. But those influences have not gone away. They still ping around in our patients.
They most certainly do. I think long COVID is a major, and without exaggeration, maybe the major healthcare issue of our time, our current situation.
The major.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a provocative statement.
Yeah, well, it's not intended to be, but I think it is a truthful statement in that for many Western healthcare providers, healthcare policy people, healthcare economics people, long COVID is a major, major issue. Us in the Chinese medicine community, we're not always so connected to that, to healthcare policy issues or healthcare economic issues. But I've been working with Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center here in the Northeast since 2022. And I've been in detailed conversations with them. And one thing that has come out of that is we're going to be resubmitting an NIH grant for me to train acupuncturists to treat long COVID and gather data on the efficacy of that and compare it to the efficacy of Western medicine. But aside from that, in speaking with these healthcare policy and healthcare economics people, there is major, major concern about the short and long-term issues of long COVID. So the data that's gathered by the NIH and the CDC in particular is really stunning. The estimates are, which may be low estimates, conservative estimates, but the estimates are that here in the United States, 18 to 20 million people have long COVID.
18 to 20 million.
18 to 20 million. And those numbers may be low. I've seen numbers as high as 22 to 24 million. But in the middle number, about 20 million people in the United States have long COVID. Of those people, 3 to 4 million of those people are going to apply for permanent disability because they can't work. 3 to 4 million people. The economics of that are $170 to $200 billion a year in lost wages. That's over 1% of the GDP. That's over 1% of all the money created in the United States each year may be lost because of long COVID. So that is a tsunami of converging issues because the healthcare system in the United States, one, it's not functioning very well in general, but two, the system is not set up to onboard 3 to 4 million claims for permanent disability. The system's just not set up for that. And it's certainly not set up to pay an additional 3 to 4 million people for permanent disability. So it is a major issue, and without exaggeration, maybe the major issue that confronts us in terms of healthcare policy and healthcare economics. And the reality is that COVID also involves over 200 signs and symptoms. 200. And Western medicine is simply not set up to treat those kinds of conditions.
Okay, hang on a second.
Yeah.
200 different signs and symptoms. How do you take 200 different signs and symptoms and collapse it into, here's a syndrome we call long COVID? Because it seems like you might, I'm not trying to be a troublemaker here, but like, how do you come up with some kind of a definition for something if it's got such a broad reach in terms of what might be included in it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the information gathered about long COVID is obviously coming from Western medicine. That's part of what they do well.
Mm-hmm. They do it really well.
Yeah, they have the way that something is associated with long COVID is there have been quite literally millions of people's information gathered. And the definition of long COVID now, which has changed over time, but the definition now is the existence of new signs and symptoms that exist for at least 90 days after the Western diagnosis of long COVID. So from that process, from that methodology, there are 200 signs and symptoms associated with what's now called long COVID. So it's not one thing. It's not this particular thing. It is a condition. It is a diagnosis that without exaggeration can affect every organ and every system in the body. And Western medicine, the way it is now practiced and conceptualized, is just not set up to treat that. That's not what it does. But the good news is Chinese medicine is very much set up to treatment. The way we diagnose, the way we treat, the way we understand disease and the progression of disease, we are uniquely situated to treat it. And Western medicine is not. Western medicine can do other things very well. Treating multi-organ, multi-system conditions is simply not what they're good at.
Mm-hmm. Or we'll get into the Chinese medicine piece in a moment because it's totally relevant. And it is one of the really, I think, powerful lenses that East Asian medicine brings, to our world, is that we're able to look at multiple systems, almost multiple systems as emergent phenomena, in a sense. It's so, I'm going to use air quotes here, unscientific in a way, and yet it's so holistic and, I won't call it, well, it depends on what you want to call scientific, because look, in many ways, Western medicine is a very reductionist view of how things look. How do you square that with a physics that over 100 years ago said, yeah, you can't really be certain about anything, right? The observer changes what's observed.
Yes.
So it gets a little bit weird, which is why I'm looking forward to this conversation with you. I've got a question, and I'm asking it because I think there's some people in our audience that are probably asking it in their own mind. So I want to make sure that this gets in for them. When we're looking at long COVID, is there any, how do I phrase this? Or is there any screening given to people that had a vaccine versus people that didn't have a vaccine in terms of what they're seeing? In a way, people that didn't have the vaccine are a kind of control group. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any differences or if the data is showing any differences in what you're finding there.
Yeah, as far as I know, and I can't say I've looked at this exhaustively, but as far as I know, that is not controlled in terms of the data that is gathered with Western medicine. I think that that's not a control group. That's not something that they're trying to parse out. My experience, and this could obviously quickly go into the political, which is not where I'm intending to go, but my understanding of vaccines, my clinical understanding of vaccines is vaccines by their nature any vaccine creates an inflammatory response. That the way that it works, the mechanism is something foreign is injected into the body and the body creates inflammation as a response. So we can say the vaccine response, the immunoresponse of vaccines is an inflammatory response. And with that understanding, I would translate the term inflammation into the Chinese medicine term heat. I think that's a close analogy. So vaccines by their nature create heat, and conditions like COVID and long COVID are definitely inflammatory hot conditions. They're not exclusively that, but they are that. So Vaccines can create heat. COVID and long COVID are inflammatory conditions, so there can be a correlation between that. And the other Chinese diagnosis I think that vaccines in general clearly create are also internal wind. So internal wind is just anything that changes very quickly in the body. We can call that wind. And so neurological symptoms, in my opinion, not more than my opinion, my clinical experience, can be associated with vaccines because there's a sudden inflammatory change in the body.
Yeah. I was just wondering, as they're doing this research, if they were using it as an opportunity to do a bit of let's look at people with vaccine, let's look at people without vaccine. Again, as a control study, is there a difference in amounts of long COVID or symptoms or anything like that? But it sounds like it's not being looked at.
Not as far as I know, no.
And yeah, for sure. I remember during COVID, people that didn't want the vaccine, who had already had COVID, said, "Hey, look, I've had COVID. I've had the inflammatory response. I'm good to go." Again, there's a whole political thing around that. But thinking as clinicians, it's like, well, that, at least to me, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense that when people are exposed to a substance, they develop immunity. That would be kind of more of a Western view. We can say from an Eastern view that the Wei Qi, the protective Qi, now has information about this foreign substance and can potentially get better at defending against it. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear more about how you're using Chinese medicine to address it. Because look, whether it came from, a wet market or a laboratory, or whether you had a vaccine or whether you didn't, look, it's all water under the bridge. One of the great things about Chinese medicine is we're pretty good at taking a look at what is here now and what do we do about it now.
Right. I very much agree. I think those other discussions are relevant. I'm not dismissing those discussions, but it's similar to Lyme disease. Really, what I was very confident that COVID and eventually long COVID were treatable because I have a lot of experience treating Lyme disease. I've been treating hundreds of people with Lyme disease going back for more than a decade. So when long COVID, what is now called long COVID, it wasn't called long COVID when I started treating it. I started treating people who are now diagnosed with long COVID going back to June of 2020. So just a couple of months after COVID hit. I was confident that long COVID was treatable because the disease progression and the etiology is similar. It's not the same as, but it's similar to Lyme disease. And so Chinese, just for context, I think in terms of us as a profession, us as a group, these complex conditions like Lyme disease, late-stage neurological Lyme disease, long COVID, these are really significant opportunities for us as a profession. One, because there's a lot of people suffering. As I mentioned before, there's 20 million people in the United States estimated to have long COVID. And these people are really sick. It's not like the flu. It's like debilitation. And of the 20 million people, 3 to 4 million people could be applying for permanent disability because they can't work. So this is an opportunity for us on a large scale to help people, but then also to demonstrate clinically what we can do as clinicians. So for me, what allows me to understand and conceptualize COVID and long COVID and Lyme disease are the traditions of Chinese medicine. And so I'm very much a tradition-based practitioner. I would call myself a classical-based practitioner, where I'm looking to the different traditions, the different classical traditions of Chinese medicine to understand what's going on. And what I do clinically, because I think it's necessary to do, is I take these different traditions that we'll talk about, and I think they can be blended together. And I think they need to be blended together because of how complex the conditions are. And for other classically based practitioners, they don't agree with that necessarily.
You could get in trouble. You're swimming outside your lane.
Yeah, I could get in trouble, and sometimes I do, but there's more important things than worrying about getting in trouble, especially when people are suffering.
That's right.
And so these are not just my ideas, this is my clinical experience. So the first tradition that's most relevant with COVID and long COVID is the Shang Han Lun, is the school of cold. And the reason for that is because COVID, the V part of COVID, COVID, the V part of COVID, indicates it's a virus. So viruses by their nature are usually, not always, but are usually cooling. Viruses are usually cold, and bacteria is usually hot. Not 100%, but my experience most of the time.
I had not thought about it in that way. That's an interesting screen to put on it.
Yeah, and I think that lens is relevant because not all conditions are the same.
That's right.
Right? Different, and this, of course, it's obvious, but the way, and having done literature reviews of the way practitioners, including Chinese medicine-based practitioners, East Asian medicine-based practitioners are treating COVID, that simple lens is vital because how we see the condition affects everything. Not only affects the efficacy of the treatment, but it allows us to conceptualize things differently. So viruses, by their nature, are cold. COVID is a virus, and it's certainly cold. And we can see that because the signs and symptoms, the first sign and symptom often of COVID was feeling chilled, which is taiyang. And then the second.
Yep, very classic, very classic.
Yeah, second stage, alternating chills and fever. Third stage, big fever. So taiyang, xiaoyang, yangming, right? So that empirically orients us towards the tradition, which is the Shang Han Lun. So that's very important. The other important tradition, and there's actually four I'd like to talk about, three traditions and one disease progression theory. So that's very important because that indicates we know where it's coming from. But taiyang to xiaoyang, xiaoyang to yangming, taiyang to xiaoyang is the beginning of the creation of heat. And then once we get to yangming, then it's more heat. It's a lot of heat, the four bigs of heat. That's very important because my primary orientation as a clinician is actually the Wen Bing, is a school of heat. Because as I write in my article, co-authored article, and as I write in my book, I very much believe, and I think there's overwhelming evidence to indicate that we're a hot people. And we're so hot that we're warming the planet. That's how hot we are.
A hot people.
A hot people. A hot, overstimulated, overly busy people. And that assumption or that understanding is vital also because not every tradition sees everything the same. You know, we say Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine, but it's really Chinese or East Asian medicines.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it?
It's right. It's a diversity of opinion. And that's our strength. That's our strength. Diversity is strength and not weakness. So these different views have different assumptions. And the assumption that I very much resonate with are from the school of heat, the Wen Bing. So that's important because the first tradition I think that is relevant, and obviously is the Shang Han Lun, because cold is their view and viruses are cold and COVID is cold. But the cold transforms into heat. And that's important because the primary thing I treat clinically, physically, mentally, emotionally, even for spiritual issues, is heat. And we are a hot, overstimulated, amped up people. And what I mean by us in the United States and us in the West, we are overstimulated. So that's important because we talk about roots and branches in Chinese medicine. So we can say the branch of COVID is cold, but the root issue that makes us susceptible to the lingering inflammation of COVID is our own internal existing heat. So I think we need to blend the school of cold and the school of heat. And that's really important because there's so many people, at least in my clinical practice, but I think in general in the West, in the United States, that are massively overstimulated. We're just so amped up in diet, lifestyle, how we live, what we value, what we don't value. We're just a really, really hot people. And the Wen Bing, the school of heat, is the epidemics tradition. It's the tradition in Chinese medicine that was developed between the 1300s and the 1500s in China to treat one of their epidemics. And so this is my translation. This is not agreed upon, and this can be controversial, but it is the truth as I understand it. The Wen Bing was developed because of the inability of the Shang Han Lun to treat epidemics from the 1300s to the 1500s. Shang Han Lun didn't work. And it didn't work because it was treating things as if they were coming from cold. But epidemics, by their nature, the writers from the Wen Bing tradition talk about a lot of things. One thing they talk about is that epidemics happen because large groups of people are out of balance. Epidemics are not just an individual thing. It's a cultural thing. It's a society thing.
Huh. So that's in the Wen Bing material?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And that makes sense because something spreads because it's in the culture. It's not one person. There's enough people with something going on to allow the pathology to spread.
Sure. You can think of bubonic plague Europe. There's something going on in the culture.
Exactly.
A pathogen comes in, spreads like wildfire.
Right. And wildfire. Right. So what is spreading? Fire. That's what allows, because fire is yang. So yang allows things to spread quickly. So we need to combine the Shang Han Lun, the school of cold, and the school of heat in order to understand what's going on.
I've noticed over the years that when I first hear about something that turns out to be a really good idea, I tend to reject it. I'm not sure if this is a quirk in my personality or simply that game-changing ideas are hard to appreciate at first. When I first heard about Jane's AI Scribe, I thought it sounded like good tech, but probably not for me. What can I say? Wrong again. It turns out Jane's AI Scribe allows me to put my attention more fully into the clinical encounter. I don't have to worry about capturing the details of a conversation, and so I'm more able to fully connect with and listen to my patients. Jane's AI Scribe is easy to use and already comes with templates that will immediately get you up and running. Plus, you can modify the prompts and have AI Scribe generate the style of clinical notes that you prefer. Privacy and HIPAA compliance are baked in, and as you'd expect with Jane, it's good tech that supports you and your practice. If you have Jane, give it a try, and if you don't, visit www.jane.app/demo. Sign up for Jane and use the code SHIELOGICAL to get a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Well, I'm no scholar of the Shang Han Lun, but as I recall, there are passages in there where it talks about pathogens coming in, and if a person already is cold, it's going to act like this, and if a person already has lingering heat or dampness or whatever, that pathogen is going to interact with what's already in that person.
Right.
So that's in there as well. I hadn't thought about looking at this like from the point of view of the chi of a culture or the chi of a particular development in a culture at any particular moment.
Yeah, and I think we need to do that. That part of my belief is we need to do that because epidemics don't just happen. They don't just show up. They show up because...
Well, they sure look like it.
Well, they show up because on an individual society scale, there is a pre-existing condition or conditions, plural, that allow it to happen.
Yeah, there's an underlying, let's just say, opportunity for something to come in and make some mischief.
Yes, and I think that underlying opportunity, according to the Wen Bing, when you have epidemics and pandemics, the underlying opportunity is heat. And I would expand that heat not only individually, but I would expand that heat culturally and ecologically.
Culturally, yeah. Well, I'm thinking back to Wen Bing time in China. What years were those again?
The writings, well, that's open to interpretation as always, but I would say certainly the time of the bubonic plague in Europe, what we can now call the Dark Ages. Soon after that, similar epidemics were happening in China. So one hypothesis is that the bubonic plague went from Europe to China. Some people don't agree with that, but timing-wise, it would make sense. So I would say the real development of the Wen Bing was from the 1300s to the 1500s.
I don't know my Chinese history nearly as well as I probably should. What kind of development was happening in China during that time?
Well, it was more yang. Yeah, I mean, there was more yang. There was more development, there was more change, there was more modernization, which does not imply bad. Yang is not bad and yin is not good.
No, I'm actually a fan of development and change. Just before we got on the horn here, I had to excuse myself because I had to go turn up the air conditioner and make it a little cooler. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri at this point, and it's really nice in the mornings. You have the windows open, everything's great. And then there's a moment where the heat and humidity, like bang, they're here. I'm so glad I have a little dial that I can set to springtime.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't imply when we're saying that we have excess yang, which I really very much think we do. The response is not some kind of like neo-Luddite anti-technology thing. That's not what I'm saying or implying. What I am saying is that I very much believe we have too much yang. And so a balance to yang is the yin, and epidemics happen when there's too much yang.
Too much yang. Well, we certainly have plenty of yang in our society at this point. I would say world in general.
Yeah, right. And so global yang, global excess yang is what makes us susceptible to epidemics. And that's not only individual and cultural, but it's ecological. You know, to take it back to Western science since the 1990s, mid to late 1990s has been talking about how the radical warming of the climate is going to make things like epidemics, pandemics, disease more common. And we're absolutely seeing that. And the biology of that is when things get warmer, there's more, from a Chinese view, Eastern medicine view, there's more warmth, there's more yang in the environment, and the viruses and the bacteria can live longer and live stronger lives.
Well, and everything thrives and develops faster.
Yes, exactly.
Under the influence of heat.
Exactly. So, and there's some viruses and bacteria, they can't survive when it gets warm, when it gets cold. So they literally need the warmth to live. So when there's more warmth, there's more energy in the system, and that includes more energy for viruses and bacteria.
Yeah, we certainly live in an incredible microbial world.
We do, and we're adding yang and qi to that, and we're seeing the results of that.
Do you give some thought to this? And this is kind of a new idea, but I hear it more and more frequently, this idea that there's not just a gut biome, but there's an entire biome on our skin and in our eyes and in our mouth. Like we're these cultures of tiny creatures. We're these collectives of tiny creatures. And, you know, the whole idea of the germ theory was, well, there's a germ and these germs are bad and they make people sick. And so we have to get rid of germs. Well, that's like saying, get rid of life.
Yeah. Yeah, there are germs. I mean, and the Wen Bing actually, interestingly, by the 1700s, was specifically talking about external pathogens. Because the one difference in the way things are conceptualized is the Shang Han Lun wasn't really talking about breathing in pathogen. It was more talking about exposure, like the neck, as a place where cold can come in the back, because cold attacks the yang's the back of the body, so the cold comes in the back. The Wen Bing practitioners were more of the ones talking about how you can breathe in the pathology, right? So that's getting more into a Western biomedical view of things. So there are obviously viruses and bacteria, but there's always viruses and bacteria, right? It's so the idea that virus and bacteria are the problem, well, they can't be the main problem because there's a billion of them all the time. We're breathing them in all the time. So the issue is our internal environment. You know, so of course there's things on the outside, and there should be things on the outside and the inside. And the issue is how balanced we are so that we can be at peace with the bacteria that's in us and on us and around us all the time. So I think disease, germ theory is not irrelevant. It's just a small part of the picture.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not irrelevant, but it's not the whole story.
No, it's not. Because even with COVID, right? Like, everyone in the United States, almost, unless you were literally locked in a room for several years, you had to have been exposed to COVID. But not everyone got COVID and not everyone got long COVID. So there's other issues to talk about.
Yes. So tell us what you're doing in clinic with this.
Well, been busy.
As well you should be.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I've treated, I don't know how many, close to 70 people with long COVID now, something like that, and consistently seen really, really good results. And some of the people have, you know, relatively mild long COVID, but a lot of people are very, very sick, either partially or completely disabled. The article I co-authored that was published last year. I co-authored with two doctors, two MDs from Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, who I co-authored this grant with. Also, it has 4 case studies, so it's a case series article of 4 people.
That's our favorite. That's our favorite in Chinese medicine.
Yes, that fits us. and I think that they're representative. I didn't cherry pick them. They're representative in terms of age, and some people were working and some people were retired, but they were all really sick and they all got better, and not just part of the way better. They're self-reported between 95 and 100% better. And they all had many, and in some cases, quite literally a dozen or more symptoms. So my understanding about long COVID was really influenced by my more than a decade experience treating COVID. And so in addition to using the Shang Han Lun and the Wen Bing, I also used the Wai Ke, which is the neurology tradition to treat neurological symptoms. And then the last thought process I use is called Bien Hua, which is to change and transform. And that's a really beautiful, insightful disease progression theory that connects specifically the Wen Bing School of Heat and the Wai Ke, the neurology tradition. So Bien Hua, to change and transform, it's really simple, but really significant and even profound. So it's 4 parts. First part is heat. Heat creates dryness. That's not that complicated, right? The heat goes up, the yin goes down. That's simple. So 2 parts, simple. The next 2 parts are really interesting and I think clinically important. So first part, heat. Second part, dryness. Third part is from the dryness, the body creates dampness, which is phlegm.
Because it's trying to moisten the dryness.
Correct. And it's trying to compensate for the dryness.
Yes. I would call that a natural, normal, and positive physiological function of the body attempting to re-regulate itself.
Yes, it makes sense. If things are dry, the body will create moisture. But with the first stage of heat, the heat is cooking off the fluids. So the only fluids that can stay are the heavy, sticky fluids, which is the damp.
Glop. You end up with glop.
Right. So it's hot, dry phlegm. So heat creates dryness, dryness creates glop, creates phlegm. And the next response, again, which is logical, is when there is dampness, there is phlegm, that's heaviness, things are being weighted down, the body creates internal wind to try to blow away the dampness.
Trying to disperse it.
Yes, exactly.
But it's hard to disperse glop. You just make it gloppier.
Right. Because you're not dealing, and then so the first stage is heat, the last stage is wind. What happens? Heat is yang excess, wind is yang excess. What happens if you have a fire and you blow on the fire? It creates more fire. So wind creates heat. So now it's all creating itself.
Yes.
So that's a really important disease progression theory because that can explain things like long COVID and Lyme disease, where you can go through the different stages.
Where did you get? Okay, this is embarrassing. I've been at Chinese medicine a couple of years now. I've not heard of the Bien Hua theory this way. Where does this come from?
I came from my teacher, Jeffrey Yuen, Dr. Jeffrey Yuen. I've been studying with Jeffrey for 20 years, and I think I got that from a advanced herb training I did with him. And that's, that speaks to, we have all these wonderful texts, these beautiful texts in Chinese medicine. But there's still, even in our modern day, there's still parts of Chinese medicine that are orally transmitted or that have been written down somewhere, but where they are, I don't know.
Yeah, things get lost. This Bien Hua, it really makes sense, and I love it. It reminds me a lot of some things that I've read in Stephen Clavy's Fluid Physiology and Pathology in Chinese Medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's got some really great stuff on fluid physiology, and I think, as I recall, some of this idea is in there. So I'm really glad you're bringing it out, and I'm really glad you're reminding me of it. Because, it's one of those things we get exposed to so much over the years. And it kind of, at least for me, it kind of lingers in the background somewhere. But to bring it into a more thoughtful awareness and think about looking for it in the clinic, well, if I look for it in clinic and see it, well, then you can do something about it.
Yeah, and you can see it. You can see it.
Oh, I'm sure. I'll probably see it this week.
Right. See it tomorrow. Right. And so here's so I can remember before I was introduced to this by my teacher, seeing tongues, right? And not being using tongue diagnosis as an example, like someone's tongue would be hot, red, and then it would be cracked, which would be yin deficiency. and then there'd be a coating on top. And I'd look at that, and then sometimes it would even be deviated. And I'd be like, well, what's that about? That's bien noir. Heat is red, dryness is cracked coating. So this is important because dryness and dampness are not contradictory. We can say, just like you were saying, it's just the body's responding in a very intelligent way. So then we have to trace it back to where it comes from. And from this bien noir view, it starts with heat. So we need to treat the heat, the dryness and the dampness. And then with that, with all the dampness, the tongue can become deviated because that's indicating internal wind.
There's your wind. Yeah.
Yeah. I see bien noir tongues every day.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's a fantastic handle. Now, are you treating this with herbs? Are you treating it with acupuncture? What do you, diet?
Yeah, all of it. Acupuncture, herbs, diet, lifestyle. For me, diet and lifestyle is essential in general, but with conditions like COVID, long COVID, Lyme disease, they're really essential because if we're pulling out the pathology, if we're pulling out heat and damp and wind, and people are putting in heat and damp and wind, it doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it works less well, and it certainly works more slowly. But I use, in the beginning, I'll just usually use acupuncture, diet, and lifestyle. And then after a little while, I'll introduce herbs. So I'm very much an herbalist. I have a big in-house Chinese and Western herb pharmacy. Mm-hmm. So I certainly think in terms of herbs, and think the best herbs necessarily with these conditions are customized, where you're trying to be real specific to treating the person. So yeah, I use it all. I use diet, lifestyle, acupuncture, and herbs. And that combination, I think, is really potent. And just to speak on that, with diet and lifestyle, because we're such a holistic medicine, part of what we can do is tailor the treatments to people. And people don't always like it in the beginning, like, oh, I can't eat this and I can't do this. But it is empowering. Once they see the results, which are very, very likely, then they are actively participating in their own health care. And rather than being hierarchical top-down medicine, it's a much more equal medicine where we're working with our patients and giving patients the information that they can be empowered in their own healthcare.
Depends on if they want that or not.
True.
Depends on if they want that, because this is not a criticism of Western medicine, but it's an observation. One of the promises of conventional medicine is we will help you get over your problem with very little effort on your part. Hand it to us, we'll have it handled. We're not going to ask you to make changes. We're not going to ask you to change your lifestyle. We're just going to handle it. And a lot of people like that idea. It's like, good, I don't have to change anything. Just I'll take this pill, or I'll do the surgery, or whatever it is. Not everybody's like that. Some people really do like that empowered sense of being connected to their body and their health and their well-being. For sure, those folks gravitate to our medicine. But I can for sure see the allure of, I don't have to change anything and this problem's going to go away. Like, sign me up, and pass me another beer.
Right. No, I agree with you. And to be honest and frank about it, that's part of the pathology of Western medicine. And not only in terms of clinical efficacy, but just in terms of disempowering patients, right? Where people just come in and they get the procedure or the meds or whatever, and there's no discussion of diet and lifestyle. And that is, again, not only does it not work very well clinically, but it's disempowering. People are not given the information to understand what is causing their symptoms and the things that they can do to help themselves feel better.
I do not disagree. I completely get it. Again, and maybe it's just that people have been entranced by Western medicine, or they're like me and they're kind of lazy.
Well, but here's a comment on that. When you're treating people, like new patients, I treat most of them. I mean, I have existing people who are better, but new people come in. Most of them are coming in for serious conditions. Lyme disease, long COVID, cancer, neurological symptoms. So those people are motivated.
Yeah, they're motivated because they've already been down that route.
Right.
And it hasn't helped. Yeah. So there's a real benefit to people having walked through multiple other doors that were not helpful before they come to us.
Right. And I think people don't like it in the beginning, but almost all of the time, once people start to experience the clinical results, they become committed. And when they feel that, and then they kind of veer off into the world of more hot foods and windy foods and damp foods, and then they feel the results of that, then they are experiencing themselves a little case study. What happens when I eat windy, damp, phlegm foods? Well, I don't feel good, and my symptoms start to come back. So then they get the internal feedback mechanism within themselves, and maybe there's some complaining about it, but ultimately, in many cases, there's not, because they feel it. It's not just theory. It's not like, well, don't eat this because that's quote unquote bad for you. It's this thing is creating this internal condition, which is creating your symptoms. So then you have patients who are advocating for themselves, which I think is really important.
I think it is too. And back to that empowerment, when people, I've seen this in my clinic, when people get it, they really get it. They have this sense of, I can get better, things are changing, I'm in touch with my body in a way that I've not been in touch with it before. It's a little life-changing.
Agreed. And I think people, not always, but in my clinic, most of the people that are coming in, not for Western medicine. I'm not practicing Western medicine.
Right.
I'm not. And people know that. And people know I'm the guy who's going to tell them to not drink coffee and spicy food and don't eat dairy for a while. Like, that's, people come in and they kind of had their head down. They're like, I heard from my partner, friend, working person that you're going to tell me these things. And I said, yeah, I'm probably going to tell you those things. So I think part of our niche as a profession, personally and collectively, is to be a genuine alternative. To really say, this is different. This is not that we can't interface with Western medicine. We can, but this is a different thing. We're doing a different thing in a different way based on different assumptions. And I think that there is a vast opportunity for that in the US because so many people recognize the dysfunction of conventional medicine.
Well, and if you haven't gotten better and you're open to something different, and that something different helps you, okay, now you've got to integrate what that means for your life.
Right. And I think that that's genuine healthcare.
I would agree for sure.
That is medicine that is caring for health rather than caring for profit or caring for the status quo.
Well, I don't know, man. I'm looking to make a profit in my clinic.
Nothing wrong with that.
I want to stay in business so I can keep doing this.
I'm with you. There's nothing inherently wrong with profit. It's just when the profit is the underlying motive, which I think unfortunately is true with conventional medicine. No, as I've been self-employed for 30 years. Profit's a fine thing.
I love that. That's such a great distinction. Thank you. When profit is the main underlying motive.
Yeah. That's not very kind-hearted. And people feel it. People feel it when it's about the money rather. There's nothing wrong with making money. We have real money issues, I think, in our profession.
I think we do too, which is why I'm glad you just made this very important distinction. Profit is fine. If it's the main thing you're doing it for, all right, that's going to be a problem. But if you leave the profit motive out of it, if you leave that out of the mix, now we're leaving an important aspect, an important bit of yang and nutritive qi, for that matter.
Yes, and we see that, kind of diverging a little bit, but I think a lot of the issues we're seeing with educational institutions now in the US with Chinese medicine, with East Asian medicine, is coming because we don't value what we do enough. And part of the way we value what we do is we need to charge a reasonable fee. So if students graduate with a whole lot of debt, but they don't make enough money, that's an issue. That's an economic yang issue. And so with all the great things we can do for COVID and long COVID and Lyme and most every other condition, we should value it. So one way that we can address these larger professional issues and economic issues, we just need to charge enough. We need to charge a reasonable fee individually and collectively. And we don't. We don't charge enough. And I put myself in that camp. If we charged more money, loans would be able to be repaid easier. People who hired acupuncturists would be able to pay them more. And that would really address, on a large scale, a lot of the issues that we're seeing now. Because the tuition fees go up and up, but which I don't think most people in Chinese medicine schools are not making a lot of money. So I don't think it's a greed-based thing. It's just things are costing more and more. But the rates that we charge have not gone up proportionately. So there's a disconnect there. So I think we should value our profession and evaluate what we do in terms of the help we can provide, which is really substantial. So profit is fine. If you're a small business owner and you don't make enough money, that's lousy. I've had businesses like that. That's no fun, but that should not be the lead.
Yes, you're not a business owner for long.
No, and it's not, and even if you can scrape by, it's not very fun. It's not good for your qi. It's not good for your yang. It's not good for your shen, because you're always stressed out about money. But we shouldn't lead with that. We should lead with the best of intentions of really trying to be of service to people.
In clinic, there is no such thing as a small detail. The needle you reach for, the formula you prescribe, the Sanfu Tian treatment plan you've been preparing for. Your patients place their trust in you, and you deserve to place that same trust in tools that you use. At Blue Poppy, they hold their products to the same standard that you hold your care. Herbal formulas crafted for consistency, needles that perform the way you expect them to, clinic essentials that arrive on time. As Sanfu Tian approaches, now is the time to stock your clinic with the formulas, moxin needles, and essentials you rely on most. Because when your tools are dependable, your focus stays where it belongs, on your patients. No guesswork, no compromises, just steady support behind the scenes. Blue Poppy, the choice of practitioners since 1982. Yes. I want to come back to treating not just long COVID. I want to hear about how your experience with Lyme has helped to inform what you've been doing with long COVID.
Yeah, it's informed fundamentally. And my treating lots of people with Lyme has really informed my clinical practice fundamentally. So the basic good news with conditions like COVID, long COVID, Lyme disease, totally treatable. Totally treatable. And that's not just wishful thinking. Between Lyme and long COVID, I've treated hundreds and hundreds of people. So that's the good news. The issue is I believe, and speaking from my clinical experience, we need to rely on these old traditions, because these traditions are these paths, this wisdom, this understanding of how to make sense of this. Because I think for some, maybe one reason why practitioners in Chinese medicine are not comfortable treating Lyme or long COVID. Lyme is similar. There's literally hundreds of signs and symptoms associated with Lyme. There's at least 200 signs and symptoms for long COVID. And people come in regularly and they have 10, 15, 20 different symptoms. There's digestive system, pain, neurological, can't sleep, anxious, night sweats, hot flashes, depressed. It's all of that and more. And so from a reductionistic medical view, it's like, whoa, what do we do? Right? And from an Eastern medical view, what we do is we understand what's going on based on these traditions. Because these traditions, part of the beauty and the wisdom of these traditions is they're telling us what's going on. Right? So there's a saying historically in Chinese medicine is that the superior physician understands transmission. And so the way I translate that is a superior physician. If we don't want the word superior, we can say the insightful physician understands transmission, right? So what we want to understand, if something is here, if something is at a disease, Lyme, COVID, long COVID, if something is at a particular point, we need to understand where it came from and where it is going. And that's exactly what disease progression theories like Bien Hua talk about and what Shang Han Lun and the Wen Bing talk about. It's talking about disease progression theory. So another understanding of that is we can treat the past, the present, and the future simultaneously.
Ooh, wow. Okay, I want to hear more about this. And the reason I do, I've had this long standing idea that one of the fantastic things about Chinese medicine is that it doesn't matter where things have come from. I mean, it matters. And it matters what's happened in the past. But in a way, it doesn't matter because you're working from the present. You're going to start with where you are. I know there's other traditions like with homeopathy, and the whole idea is you have to go backwards and get back to some more pristine state. It seems to me with Chinese medicine, we take where we are and we're moving forward. But it sounds like you're also including the past in some way. So I'm super keen to hear about how you're working these three dimensions. It's funny, I just had a conversation with Peter Firebrace. In fact, it's just published by the time this one goes up. It'll be a few weeks ago. It was on time, timing, and the timeless. And so I hear you talking about past, present, and future. We can treat all of them. All right. I'll shut up. I'm super keen to hear it.
So that treating the past, the present, and the future can sound like some maybe Taoist mystical thing. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about using disease progression theory and these traditions to understand what's going on. For example, let's say someone has COVID and is becoming long COVID, and they have all signs of heat. They feel hot. The pulse is really forceful in all positions. The tongue is really red. And we know they had COVID because, let's say, they were diagnosed with COVID, or they were exposed to people with COVID, and then they had chills, and then they had alternating chills and fever. So we have a good idea it came from cold. But we're saying now this person has they're having gastrointestinal issues. Their tongue is hot, especially in the earth position, I would say the middle center of the tongue. Their pulses are forceful or flooding. So we can say they have Yang Ming heat, right? They have heat in the stomach and the large intestine, Yang Ming heat. Well, if it came from COVID, which is cold, we know it came from Tai Yang to Xiao Yang to Yang Ming. So that's relevant because we know where it came from. So then part of the thinking can be to vent the cold that's causing the heat back out. So we're going to go backwards. Rather than Tai Yang, Xiao Yang, Yang Ming, we're going to go Yang Ming, Xiao Yang, Tai Yang. Right.
Yes, the Shang Han Lun talks a lot about this.
Yes. Right. And there's such important logic in that, because in the herbs we use and the points we use, if something is here at this point and we know where it came from, then we're trying to bring it back out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if it's at Yang Ming, to use a Shang Han Lun term, what's after the Yang Ming? Tai Yin. Right? So Tai Yin is where the postnatal qi gets affected, stomach and spleen. So we can say, well, we know it came from Tai Yang to Xiao Yang to Yang Ming. We don't want it to go to Tai Yin. We don't want it to start affecting someone's qi, someone's postnatal qi. So then we can start treating that. We can even start giving them qi tonics with herbs, or we can do acupuncture points that are giving them the qi in the blood, especially the qi, stomach, spleen, and lung, to give them the qi to eject the cold all the way back out from Yang Ming to Xiao Yang to Tai Yin, so it gets ejected. So we can understand where something came from and where something is going. And when we're treating where something is going, that's genuinely preventative medicine. It's not just saying, oh, well, veggies are good for us and don't drink soda. All that's true. But this is person-specific, disease progression theory specific. And so we're treating something before it shows up. And that's really relevant if we go back to Bien Hua. So heat creates dryness, damp, wind. So many people have heat and dryness and damp, at least in my clinical practice. So what's the next stage? The next stage is internal wind. So even if people don't have signs and symptoms of internal wind, even if their tongue is not deviated or the wood pulse, the liver and gallbladder pulse isn't showing wind, for example, we can be treating wind before it shows up. And I do that all the time.
Yeah, so you want to be preventative. You don't want it to go further. The buck stops here.
Right. And it's not just preventing disease in particular with Bien Hua. People have heat and dryness and dampness. We know the next stage is specifically internal wind. So we're specifically treating that with acupuncture and herbs, diet, and lifestyle. Or if someone has Yang Ming heat, to use a Shang Han Lun perspective, we know the next stage is Tai Yin. So we're giving them qi so they don't get tired. So the pathology...
Protect the Tai Yin.
Exactly.
Protect where it's headed. We know where it's going. Head it off at the pass.
Exactly. So we're treating conditions before they show up. And that's not just beautiful theory, that is clinically incredibly effective. So if something's at Yang Ming, we know it came from Tai Yang, Xiao Yang, we know it's going to Tai Yin. So in formulas and certainly in treatments, we can do all of that simultaneously. And that's not that hard. It's not like there's a lot of herbs necessarily or a lot of points. It's just the understanding of what's going on.
Oh my goodness. You just put your finger on something I think is so important. When you're clear with your diagnosis, when you're clear with what you're seeing, You don't need to use a whole lot of points or a whole lot of herbs to take care of it. You're not indulging in the thinking of, oh, I better do some of this or better do some of that to cover my bases. You're not looking to cover bases. You're looking to protect the thing that you know is headed for trouble. It really changes what your treatment looks like.
It does, and more is not better than less. More points doesn't mean it's a better treatment. More herbs in a formula. In fact, I would say more herbs and more points can come from less clarity. We're like not really sure what's going on, so we're going to do a little this and a little that, and hopefully it'll work. And I'm not criticizing people.
I would say if there's not clarity and the treatment reflects that lack of clarity, it will not be that effective.
Right.
I mean, in my experience at this point, in my clinic, if I'm not clear in doing a targeted treatment, the results they're going to come back and go, well, I think I'm a little better, not sure.
Yeah, rather than I'm a whole lot better
or I'm a whole lot worse.
Or yeah, right. That's okay too. And that's part of it is these traditions, Shang Han Lun, Wen Bing, Bien Hua, Wai Ke, the neurology tradition, they're giving us these roadmaps, right? So when things are complicated or things are confusing, we can go back to these roadmaps. And a really important point, again, controversial, but for me, clear, is not every so
I love that.
Yeah, the truth hopefully is useful as I understand it. Not every tradition can treat every condition. So the Shang Han Lun does not treat epidemics well, right? And if we want to treat neurological conditions, the Wai Ke is the one to treat neurological conditions. That's wind. If we want to understand how heat can create wind with dryness and dampness, and that's Bien Hua. So in order to treat a lot of conditions, it's important to get proficient at multiple traditions. And that's not something that people like. Some people are really into the Shang Han Lun. They say the Shang Han Lun treats everything. The Wen Bing treats everything. I don't see how that could be true. Because if the Shang Han Lun treats everything, then you're saying that everything originates with cold. Not everything originates with cold. Some things originate with wind. Some things originate with heat. So in order to treat complex conditions like long COVID and Lyme and other complex conditions, I think we need to be proficient at multiple traditions, and then we have to understand how to skillfully blend them together.
I would not disagree. My 8th grade shop teacher used to constantly remind us, mostly because we were knuckleheads, right tool for the right job, boys.
Exactly.
And in my training as a Chinese medicine practitioner, I had teachers who would say, here's a theory, here's a set of ideas, it's really useful for this, here's some things, it's useful for that. What's going to be useful for your patient? Well, that's your job to figure out and then apply it.
Exactly.
But you're going to need a couple of tools in the kit, at least.
Right. And if we just have a paintbrush, that's good for painting, but that's not good for drywalling or nailing boards together. Right. Right. It's just, and maybe we can kind of try and maybe it'll work somewhat, but
not really.
not very gracefully and not very artistically.
Yeah.
So then we have to match the tradition to the condition. So how do we figure that out? Well, we look at the signs and symptoms, but then also for me, and the reason I'm such a Wen Bing practitioner is I just look around in the world and how hot and overstimulated people are and how hot the world is, how hot the environment is. And that to me is obviously an invaluable tradition at this point. And that's important because the Wen Bing assumes that things come from heat. Epidemics are heat. The Shang Han Lun assumes things are coming from cold. And that is not the same thing. Something starting with heat and starts something with cold is not an equivalency. The Shang Han Lun and the Wen, and I say it that way because I have talked to Chinese medicine practitioners, and I think sometimes it's all kind of conflated. It's all kind of squished together. Like it's all kind of the same thing. It's not the same.
It's not the same thing. I remember in acupuncture school looking through the Materia Medica, and there was always a notation on where a formula came from. This came from the Shang Han Lun. This came from the Wen Bing. This came from Judan Shi. This came from Li Dongyuan. You would see where things came from. I didn't give that much thought until maybe a number of years out of school. Maybe this means something because it tells you about context.
Right. It tells you about context, and part of that context is the assumptions of the traditions where the formulas came from, and those traditions have assumptions about where disease comes from. And so it's not the same. It's not the same. And those traditions have different assumptions. They have different treatment principles. They have different diagnostic principles.
Brendan, we're back to Chinese medicines.
Yes. Yes.
We really are. We really are.
Plural. And if we're going to treat complex conditions, which I hope we will, because in many cases there isn't anywhere else to go. I've treated people who have been to literally 8 or 10 specialists, and there's nowhere else to go. We can do this. We can do this collectively, and it's such an opportunity, and there's so much suffering, but we need to have more tools than just a paintbrush. We need a paintbrush, we need a scaffold, we need a drill gun, we need a screwdriver, we need a lot of tools not a lot, we need some tools in the toolkit so we can understand which tool is best in which condition.
Right tool for the right job.
That's it. That's it.
Right tradition for the condition. That's like Muhammad Ali-ish, how to take on a condition. Right tradition for the condition.
That's it.
That's wonderful. Well, I appreciate your perspective on this. It makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's easy to conflate many things together because, well, it's Chinese medicine. There's a long history. It's all kind of that stuff. No, actually, it's not. So I really appreciate you digging into it and pointing out how these things are different. Those differences are important distinctions that we need to consider.
Thank you. And I think it shows up clinically. It's not just beautiful theory. The efficacy of this with complex conditions is really clear.
100%. All right. Anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners today before we wind this down?
No, it's a pleasure to talk, and let's go try to help people, including with complex conditions.
Let's do it. Well, that wraps it up for this conversation with Brendan. I appreciate how he takes the idea of Chinese medicine as not being one thing, which is not a new idea, but he adds a twist in that instead of choosing a method or tradition to treat a patient in general, he sees the utility in using different traditions at different parts of the treatment process. The point isn't to pick one and make it explain everything. The point is to match the tradition to what's actually in front of you. And when the condition is complex, you're probably going to need to use more than one map. I like his way of thinking, how he creates dryness. The body then naturally responds to the dryness by generating dampness. That's the intelligence of the body trying to compensate. Then, because of the heat and the dampness, phlegm becomes heavy and stuck. The body then creates internal wind to try to blow it away, and the wind, in turn, feeds the heat. Now you've got a cycle that's generating itself. And then there's the question of how you think about the condition itself. Not just looking at the snapshot of what's here right now, but being able to consider the movie, to be able to understand where and how the condition arose and where it's going. Because if you know the progression, you can treat the past, present, and future all at the same time. You can vent what came in, treat what's developed, and protect against what's coming before it gets there. It is complicated and so requires clarity. But when you have that clarity, you might find that you don't need more treatment. You just need the right targeted intervention. I do appreciate his perspective on this. It's the first time that I've thought about using different traditions, almost like you would use different formulas at different stages of treating a condition. And as we went through this conversation together, I could see the sense that it makes. I don't have experience with this in my own clinic yet, but like so many of the ideas that we discuss here on Qiological, it's something worth taking into your practice and seeing if it might fit.